think you're going to love my guest today, Professor Heath Carter from Princeton Seminary, assistant professor of history, right?
Yep. American Christianity. Yep.
And history of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And we're here to talk about why our past matters for our future. It's great to have a historian to talk about that, and particularly the work he's doing right now. I'm Lee Henson-Hasey. I'm Senior Director of Theological Education Funds Development at the Presbyterian Foundation, a ministry of the Committee on Theological Education. And I've been looking forward to this. I've been watching the Black Church series on PBS. And thinking about our conversation here and the work you're doing. I'm just really pumped. I see Jim Kitchens out from California joining us, Anna Pickney Straight from West Virginia. Please put your questions. Rebecca Malozzi from Pennsylvania, not too far away. We'd love to hear from you all. So let me say that Heath is been at Princeton 2 years now, and a lot of that time you've been teaching online, I guess.
Strange time to come, yeah. True.
But doing some really interesting things. Heath has his PhD from Notre Dame, a master's also from Notre Dame, a master's in religious history from the University of Chicago, an undergraduate in history and theology at Georgetown University. He is before he taught at Princeton, was at Valparaiso, which is part of his sort of Lutheran tradition, but he's an active member. He and his family, 3 boys and wife, are at Nassau Presbyterian there, practically on the campus. Shout out to Dave Davis and others there. What a great church that is. Has been a lecturer. I encourage you to Google him because there's some great lectures. He has a website, heathcarter.com, right?
Heath W. Carter. Yeah, I got the middle initial.
heathwcarter.com. Just some really great stuff. I got introduced to him because just a few years ago, Princeton came out with his really beautiful document, this slavery audit, race audit that they've done. And that's sort of looking back, but part of Heath's work is also looking forward. So we'll be talking about those questions, what that means, in addition to a lot of other things. He really works, and a lot of your work around were written about unions and labor, but a lot of race, things that at the intersection of Christianity and the public square, which are front and center right now. They've always been front and center, or should be front and center. So if you have questions about religion, Christianity in the public square, let's talk about that. But before we really dig in, let me just invite you, Heath, to share what is making you come alive, because Howard Thurman says we need people who are coming alive. And
Well, let me just say, first of all, it's wonderful to be with you, and wonderful to be with all those out there too. What makes me come alive? I've been here at Princeton for just a year and a half, and I kind of got into this line of work because I love teaching, love students, love the opportunity to speak, talk to them and get to know them and be a part of their life and their discernment. And I did that for 7 years with undergraduates at Valpo, and now the chance to do that with seminarians is just such a rich, wonderful privilege, to be honest. But along the way, I really also fell in love with research. And this year I'm actually on sabbatical and writing away on a book about kind of the longer history of the social gospel or social Christianity in the United States. I was just tweeting the other day that, 15 or so years into this whole history thing for me, I still love a good find. You find that thing in the archive that it's such a thrill. So right now I'm doing a lot of digital archival work because all the regular archives are shut down. But just love the chance to dive into stories and people's lives and the messiness and the beauty and the brokenness there. So teaching and research, those are the things that thankfully make me come alive, because that's my job.
Right. My father-in-law taught me this, and I can see it in you. It's not about just teaching the subjects, it's teaching the students, right? I mean, it's those relationships and this course we're going to talk about in a minute is really exciting that you're working on. But let me just say that I'm grateful for who you are and what you're doing, and all the ways you also love a good story. You're an editor also of a significant series with Erdman's Press. Tell us about
it's called the Library of Religious Biography. It's a series that was started by Mark Knoll and a couple of his colleagues in the early 1990s, and sort of a way for historians who want to write for wider publics to sort of practice doing that. And I got involved about 5 years ago and just love it. And I love it for so many reasons. The chance to talk to authors about who they might want to write about, the stories they might want to tell through those individual lives. And we just get a chance to not only work with great authors, but to publish really important books. And they're important both for the academy, but also for the church. Just this past fall, we published a new religious biography of Howard Thurman.
Good.
Was really excited about that one. We've got, big ones coming up too on everything from sort of pop culture folks, Aretha Franklin and whatnot, to politicians. We've got one coming out in a couple of years on Richard Nixon. Excited about that one. So
I got to ask this because I know you're well known back at Valparaiso for this course on hip hop America.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And any hip hop artists we can look in that series?
Oh my gosh. I don't think we have any contracts right now, but it would be a great idea. When I was teaching that course at Valpo, I just became convinced that there are few better ways into kind of post 60s American history than through the story of hip hop.
Right.
About race and gender and capitalism and religion, so many different things. And it was such a fun course to teach, and one, to be honest, where students could teach me as much as I could teach them. I had kind of the context and the background, but they know the music in a way that, to be honest, I don't. So it was a fun kind of exchange, and made for a really rich classroom experience.
What I love about and you've been doing this for a while now, not just since the Black Lives Matter movement, but I love to hear your thoughts on that. But what I think Black Lives Matter and others, have been saying is, white folk, you got to do your work. We can't, oftentimes we turn to persons of color to help do the kind of race work and investigation that we need to do ourselves, and investigate and interrogate our own privilege. And it sounds like it's something you do in your own life, but it's something you also are sort of mentoring students and doing too. And I'm sure not just white students, but others. Everybody sort of, looking back. And it sounds like that's a theme for your work, is to look back so that people can move forward in a new way. Is that accurate?
I think especially around questions of race, obviously, those are questions that as a society today, and for going way back, we've struggled to really talk about in a constructive way in the public square. And my own conviction about that is that history is actually a real help and aid to our ability to talk about these things, because it kind of takes you out of the realm of the ideological battles and into the realm of how did we get here? And I think we can kind of get on the same page, at least to some extent, about how we got here. It's a helpful frame for the conversation about how we go forward. And I certainly found that. I found that in teaching and whatnot, that, a lot of times people really don't know much about both the good and the bad. People talk about civil rights, and I've often found with students that, you might, especially with undergraduates, but, to some extent, others too, that, they might know a true sentence about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, but beyond that, there's not a lot there. There's not a lot there about, where it is that these kind of racial disparities today that we still see, where they come from. Right. So I think helping people to understand that becomes really an important foundation for the conversation about where.
So I'm gonna put in a plug. I think this is a lecture you gave at Concordia College on in 2017 on the Reformation. And part of your Reformation includes Richard Allen, which is not probably everybody's story of the Reformation.
Absolutely.
African American pastor, right?
Yeah, founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church and a sort of really important figure in the history of American Christianity, someone who's undersung in many circles.
Right.
Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, I think that's part of the beauty of introducing people to the past is there's such kind of rich stories there. There's so much we can learn from kind of that great cloud of witnesses that's gone before us. But also, I think, we learn about, we know that there are systems and structures out there in the world today that bear the kind of brokenness of the sins of the past as well. And I think
Right.
kind of having a clear-eyed view onto the ways in which that's true gives us the sort of perspective we need to really redemptively engage those systems and structures today.
So as you were arriving at Princeton, this Princeton Seminary and Slavery, a report of the Historical Audit Committee was published. There have been some press releases. If people haven't seen it, it's available online.
Yeah.
I've not read it all. I've read just portions of it, but as you're arriving there, this is coming out, and this sort of looks back, right, primarily, but it's really is kind of antebellum period. You were telling me backwards.
Yeah, it looks back and it looks forward, and I think it's a really important document. I'd really highly commend it to anyone who's listening today. I mean, it's a document that part of its purpose is just to tell the story of Princeton Seminary's relationship to slavery. And we're not the only institution that's doing this. A lot of colleges and universities are doing this right now and trying to understand. My alma mater, Georgetown, was a leader in this work and trying to understand the extent to which there are financial entanglements, ideological entanglements, and whatnot. So partly the audit is telling the story of some of our own financial entanglements and kind of a slave economy of that period. But also the ways that Princeton Seminary was the leader of a colonization movement that was seen by many at the time as a kind of progressive way to end slavery, but that in retrospect, we can certainly see was also a kind of end to slavery on a racist basis. And the colonizationists who were here and who really gave a kind of theological lens for people to kind of embrace that movement. They couldn't imagine that free black people could live here in the United States alongside white people. And so they had this idea of, sending people back to Liberia was the way forward. The thing that I think is important about this, it's not just sort of academic history for the purposes of knowing things about the past, but it's also, it helps us to understand how we as an institution got to the place that we're at. And part of what the board did, and this remains, a challenge for us, to be honest, as an institution, is to figure out, what do we do with that story? How do we move forward? What do we, part of what that document includes, and I think it's really a remarkable section, is a confession. A confession about the ways that this institution has promoted and propagated ideas that now we see as deeply wrong and sinful. But it's also, when we were part of what, the response to the document and to the confession was to say, well, how do we move forward? What do we do? And for a year, the seminary community and the board deliberated and prayed about what we might do. And last, October of 2019, so it was the fall that I got here. It's a very eventful first year here between this stuff in the fall and then the pandemic in the spring. But that fall of 2019, the board adopted a kind of set of resolutions and measures that we were going to take as sort of, I think they called it a first step along a road to repentance. And it's everything from
it's not a one and done. You can't just
not at all. And I think that's part of what we really, as a community, I think it's the work of my generation of faculty coming in here, in part, is to figure out what step 2 and 3 and 4 look like.
So there's curriculum. I mean, you're telling me there's curriculum changes that are.
There's a lot happening here, and it's exciting stuff. I mean, there's everything. Part of what came out of the audit were new scholarships. We're going to have a new faculty line studying African American Christianity that'll be hired in a couple of years. But yeah, earlier this fall we passed a new curriculum, and audit is a part of that curriculum. But it's partly a curriculum that designed to bring the best of who we've been, together with lots of the gifts and insights that this new generation of faculty coming in can bring to bear on questions around race and class and gender and sexuality and all these sort of difficult public square kinds of issues. It's a curriculum that's not afraid to tackle those things and to say, we've really got to get our students thinking about them.
Well, and you already teaching a course sort of along these lines, as I guess maybe even before the curriculum was passed. But why don't you share about that? Because it has what I was interested when we were talking maybe a month ago is you were talking about some of the research that some of the students were doing. You know,
I mean, one of my my specialty is really in the post-Civil War era, and so the audit document is really remarkable and worth everyone taking a look at. But it ends really with the Civil War, and there's a lot of story to be told from about Princeton Seminary and race from 1865 to
right.
And so last Jan term we were actually able to. I taught a course, basically bringing students into the seminary archive, and it was a phenomenal. It was right actually before the pandemic, so I'm grateful we were able to squeeze it in. But just getting students working in the papers of seminary presidents, flipping through old yearbooks, and identifying Black women students who were here and trying to follow these folks' stories. And that's part of what I think the work we have ahead of us here, in part, and thinking about sort of how does the past relate to the future. We have so many stories to tell, stories that I think are cause for celebration, stories that are cause for lament, but stories that'll help us to understand both who we've been as a seminary and who we want to become. And I think those questions are all, important and on the table in a really clear way right now.
I'm noticing your language. You've used Thanksgiving, you've used celebration, you've used lament, you've used confession.
Yeah.
I feel like I heard you say at some point somewhere around, at Princeton Seminary, Jesus Christ being at the center of who you are. I mean, even though you come, the students and faculty come from, a Presbyterian related institution, but folks from a lot of different Christian traditions.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that language that this is not just a regular American historian kind of language. It's important to say that it's.
Yeah. Well, I think that the history really matters for the church. And I think when we don't know our own history, we don't know our own stories, we're really missing out on an incredible resource, a resource of kind of examples of incredible faithfulness in times of trial and trouble, but also an incredible resource in terms of cautionary tales, things that we should learn from and about. I think, for me to be here has been such a joy. One of my first chapel services after coming to the seminary, President Barnes, it was, like I said, it was a challenging fall with the audit being released and kind of the debate around what do we do, and that debate will go on. It's not over, about how we move forward. But I remember him saying, and I really, it just deeply resonated with me that here at Princeton Seminary, we have an incredibly wide range of people from all different backgrounds and confessions and whatnot, but Jesus Christ is the center, and the center holds. And I believe that. And I think, there's not a lot of other things that we might have in common here. But that is the most important thing. And it's a grounds for really deep reflection and engagement with the past and the present and the future.
I don't know if you've seen this part of the Black Church series with PBS. I promise I don't have any endorsements.
Yeah.
In the first few minutes, it has Otis Moss III, a little clip from his sermon. I don't know if you saw that. It's about
I haven't seen it
the paralyzed man trying to get him in to be healed by Jesus, and the religious authorities standing outside. And he says, never should you confuse position with power. You made me think of this just now. He said, Pharaoh had the position, but Moses had the power. Herod had the position, but John had the power. And this is the one that snuck up on me. And it goes to what you're saying. The cross had a position. But Jesus had the power. But then he goes to Woodrow Wilson had the position, but Ida B. Wells, a social gospeler, had the power, right? It's so important, though, I think, that you shape this around, this is Christian, this is a way we witness in Presbyterian language, to how we can glorify how we can witness to our faith in Jesus Christ today, and follow that call. Folks who are out there and folks are commenting, this sounds like other institutions could learn from this. What do you think? And there's a lot of pastors and church leaders out there. What do you think churches can do? What are some? I bet there's some low-hanging fruit that if they just look around. Them. A lot of them are trying to do this work in various ways.
Well, I mean, I think there's that's a great question and an important one. And I think there's a variety of answers. I mean, one thing I think, depending on the kind of church, depending on how long your church has been around, to know the church's history. I mean, as a church historian myself, I think that's can be an important thing. And often you'd be surprised what, even in this time of things being shut down, you can find online, Google Books, things digitized, going back into the 19th century. But I think, knowing the story of how your church community is engaged in the public square, it can be very illuminating. Sometimes, if it's a newer congregation or whatnot, knowing your denominational history, but I think also just understanding how the church's witness in the past in American history. There's a lot of great work coming out right now on, for example, around the question of Christianity and race. You think about someone like Jamar Tisby.
Mm-hmm.
He's written a fabulous book called The Color of Compromise, which looks at the story of Christianity's entanglement in racism in the United States. And he's just got a new one that I haven't had a chance to read yet. I've got a copy sitting on my desk called How to Fight Racism. So I think if you're a pastor out there and you're thinking about that, I mean, Jamar is a faithful believer himself and is doing this work because he loves the church. And he believes, like I do, that history matters for the church. So I think just getting folks engaged in a way, I think it's a way, we live in a polarized age. And like I said, I think, and what I've found in my own classroom, I think it'd be true in churches too, that history is a way, kind of going back can also be a way of flying under the radar of kind of some of the ideological paralysis that we experience, and it can be challenging.
And even interpersonal
totally.
Kind of conflict. Yeah,
totally. I mean, just studying the past as a way forward, I think, in a conversation that seems stuck. To me, that's there's a lot of promise there. So I think I'd commend history to pastors, and there's more recommendations. I'd be happy to send along a list at some point. But just getting your flock engaged in the story of how we got here. I think you'll be surprised at how generative it'll be of ideas about, hey, what do we do next week? Because it'll just stimulate people's creativity.
Nice. I'm Deborah Rexrod, who is a Presbyterian leader in the James down in Virginia, saying First Church, Charlottesville, Virginia, used the color of compromise. Which is great. We maybe get some work. Oh gosh, David, what is the head of staff there? Deborah, maybe put his name in there. I'm forgetting, but the Presbyterian Historical Society, which I think you had done some work with, is a great resource, and they're doing some
100%
webinars and their stuff online. There's some great resources. But you're right. I preached at a church not too far from Louisville here a couple of years ago, and just on their website, read some things around how fair, and they were founded, I mean, I want to say 17 something. I mean, they were fairly early congregation, and very early on, actually welcomed and baptized persons of color, African Americans specifically, as members. They were sitting in the balcony, but they were, and even doing that was risky in terms of that particular time period. And it's funny, when I shared that story with them, most of the members, I mean, it's on their website. Most of them didn't know, like, where did you hear that story? I'm like, I read it on your website. It's in the minutes of your session, probably.
I mean, I find still today, I mean, just doing this work for me, and like I said, right now I'm doing a lot of research and writing this sabbatical year. There is something sort of deeply, it's a kind of spiritual work, to be honest, to read.
Not just academic. It's not just academic.
It's not. And I think as you read history, you read up on the stories, and you see people struggling to find their way forward in their day. There's something that it stimulates in me, and I think in others too, a sense of what can we learn from this? And again, just I think we have to at some level face the deep sinfulness of those who have gone before us, and partly we also have to realize how their sins are connected to ours, and how we're not just sort of readers of past stories. We are also characters in a story unfolding right now. And I think that's the other thing that this kind of work can remind one of is, the story still goes on. And we are characters in it, and the stakes are significant, and God's with us in the stories, just like God was with others before us.
So is it looking, I see our time is getting short, but so is it as simple as looking at the past and seeing those as that old mantra so you don't repeat that into the future? Is that, or is it, what is it that you think that looking back, it can be generative is what I'm hearing. Is it helps generate what a different future can look like? Is that how you say it? One
of the things, I don't think it's so simple as let's see what happened before so we can just do things differently now, right? I mean, part of what my own sense of this as a white Christian in the United States is, if you really take a close look at the past, I don't see how you can emerge from it not daunted by the scope of the church and our fellow believers' complicity in some of the deepest injustices of our national history. And I think what that does, it doesn't solve the problem for us. It doesn't point us the true arrow, straight way forward. But what it does, I think it helps us to have the right spirit as we talk together about how to move forward. It gives us a sense of humility. It gives us a sense of the need for lament. I think it motivates us to listen to believers of color and others in our communities who have been on the other side of these stories and who are still today. So I think again, there's a sort of a way in which it forms us as doers and as listeners and as hearers and as people who want to follow the Lord, but also recognize that there are some deep grooves in our national history that are pushing in other directions. And that's really hard.
It's right. Well, it's good that we have partners like you. And I'm so grateful for your work and your continuing work, and especially alongside students, but alongside the church broadly. Thanks. It sounds like your call to Princeton was at the right moment. It's clear, and it's something exciting going forward. I wish we had more time. We may have to have you back.
We can talk for a long time. I have no doubt. Yeah.
Maybe when the book gets published, that would be nice. Friends, in a couple of weeks, this is also on the podcast, Leading Theologically. We're going to have Christine Hong, who's at Columbia Seminary. I don't know if you know her. You would enjoy her, Heath. We'll be talking about decolonializing learning in the church. So this is another way to work on this. As she's also speaking the week before at the Next Church, a national gathering, as a keynote speaker. A couple of our speakers or visitors, Landon Whitsitt, Bertram Johnson, will also be at that. So I encourage folks to sign up for that. That's free the week before. Another opportunity on a similar theme here. So hope to see you at Next. Hope to see you on the 10th. But before we go, if you would be willing just to send us, bless us, charge us.
Absolutely.
It would be, we'd be grateful.
Sure. Let's pray. Oh God, our help in ages past, we give thanks for the great cloud of witnesses that has gone before us, saints whom you created and loved. Their faithfulness in troubled times is an inspiration and a prod. May we also have the wisdom to face their sins and the humility to see how they connect to our own. The landscapes and systems and communities that structure our everyday lives are riddled with injustice. In the archive, we find clues to how we got here and reminders that we too are characters in the story. Help us to discern our way faithfully forward, God. You are our hope for years to come. Amen.
Amen. That was beautiful. It's good to have you as a discernment partner.
Great to be with you, Lee. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, stay safe. Wear your mask. Don't
Absolutely.
let it slide too much. Hope to see you soon. Friends, take care.